from your own or different from what you're used to. So given that then, best of luck to all teams in what I'm sure will be incredibly outstanding debate and semi-final for World Schools. The motion of which is follows. This House prefers parenting models that adultify teenagers, i.e. giving them more responsibilities and autonomy, assuming higher capacity for independence, to those which emphasize their status and treatment as teenagers, i.e. refraining from giving them adult responsibilities and emphasizing their legal minors. And with that, I welcome the first speaker inside proposition to start the debate.
Hi, can I be seen and heard? So just a reminder, I take POIs through the chat and I go by she, her pronouns. And also I'm just gonna make a disclaimer in case my parents watch this one day in the future. None of what I'm saying is me. Okay. When children mature and change to become teenagers, parents cannot be static. Otherwise, this is a recipe for conflict and perpetual friction. It is of utmost importance that parents adapt to ensure they allow their teenagers to continue to thrive while still protecting them from the worst of outcomes. 3 arguments Hong Kong will forward. Firstly, how we better family relationships. Secondly, how we better prepare teenagers for the future. Lastly, how we better protect teenagers from the worst of harm. Before that, setup. 1, what does the status quo look like currently in terms of parenting models? We say there's currently a mix of both sides parenting model, although our side is gaining more prominence right now. But we have traditionally been more accustomed to viewing teenagers as teens. You view them to be more irrational, that as a parent, you know what's better for them than they do themselves. Second, what does our parenting model look like on our side? We say adultification looks like a general guidance framework. This obviously adapts differently to different families through trial and error, but generally here are the main outlines. 1, we would give teenagers more freedom on our side. They will likely have more financial autonomy, like a monthly allowance, instead of asking their parents for money on every purchase or having their parents decide whether or not you can buy something. You also probably will be allowed to leave the house more. You have later or laxer curfews. We would also probably assign them more responsibility. This can look like, for example, encouraging your teenagers to gain a summer or part-time job, or on a smaller scale, you may have more responsibilities at home, such as feeding or cleaning your baby sister, cooking your own food, and like chores along those lines. Thirdly, then, what is the comparative and their model in Singapore side? We say parents are likely to be stricter with teenagers, such as making a 10 p.m. curfew a hard rule, not allowing them to drink or they face punishment otherwise. We'll concede that you probably also will give them less responsibilities. The bottom line is 2 models are not only different on what is and isn't allowed, but how parents and children communicate and how they choose to do these things, i.e. on issues like sex. On opposition side, parents likely think these teenagers are too young to do this and therefore ban them from having it with their boyfriend in totality. On our side, parents are less likely to be actively against sex, but there's likely still going to prepare you properly, i.e. they're more likely to teach you how to use a condom right, teach you consent. What are the incentives of parents on both sides of the house then? We say parents have inclinations to protect their child because most parents want the best for them. Every piece of media and every natural instinct you have as a parent is to be protected. When we hear phrases of parents saying rather than letting themselves be the one, they would rather let themselves be the one hurt instead of their children. They overweigh risk with constant unfounded fear for their children's safety and the image of them as just a kid being built into their heads to not think they can make good decisions. This implies on both sides, parents probably won't just throw their hands up entirely and not care about their children. But also, we say like physically or significantly emotionally abusive or neglectful parents are probably not in this debate as well, given the type of parent that would do this are likely symmetric. If you don't put too much attention on your teen's development, you probably don't realize which model you're doing, you don't really care anyways. First argument, how do we better family relationships? Parent-child relationships are extremely important for any teen, but especially for teens who need to navigate through the tumultuous transition to adulthood. Firstly then, in opposition, why are relationships constantly at the risk of getting fractured? Here's because this is the reason why. Teenagers are going through a lot of physical and mental changes. They learn more about the world. They understand issues that 10-year-olds probably don't. This also means their preferences are likely to change. So for example, when you are a child, you really don't know what it's like to want to get into a relationship with someone else. But when you are a teenager, it becomes much more proximate. It is also during this time that there may also be more peer pressure to hang out at night or try adult activities like drinking. The freedom to make these decisions on how they spend their time and what they want to do is also something teenagers increasingly want. This desire translates into rebellion because parents continue to treat their children as their teenagers as children. This is inflammatory. This coddling goes against the very desire of teens to be given more independence independence. Consequently, you get teenagers having to sneak out at night because their friends want them to come out and have screaming matches with their parents the next morning about it. Even if the child doesn't end up sneaking out, there's going to be a lot of friction between parents and children because they want entirely different things. Note that when relationships sour during the teenage years, for many households, it is sometimes irreversible. It becomes hard to go back when you spend years fighting and being frustrated with your parents. Why do we get better parent-child relationships on our side then? Because we say parents are more likely to communicate maturely with their teenagers rather than patronize them. Opposition's parents likely don't try to justify and have a dialogue with their kids on decisions because parents still believe that their child is incapable of making rational decisions for major life issues. Instead, the parent tries to teach the child that the parent's opinion is the right one rather than discuss together. Note there's a large difference between scolding your child or actively trying to lecture them versus trying to communicate with them. On opposition, the teenager is more likely to feel like they are being ordered around. On our side, that teenager discusses with their parent who is more likely to listen to them on an equal level. The impact of communicating rather than lecturing is immense. It means the teenager feels heard and respected instead of frustrated that your parent doesn't seem to believe you can also have a right opinion. Think of a typical parenting scenario. Your teen requests you drink at an after party after graduation and prom night. You as a parent could bluntly refuse on their side. Many children probably grew up in this kind of household in Asian families when your parents refuse to justify their decisions and just say they know better than you. Or you can take the time and explain to them why it's a bad idea or perhaps against their self-interest to get really drunk at a party and then drive home. By doing this, you as a teen better internalize that your parents aren't just being mean, but are more likely going to look out for you. We avoid the frustration in Singapore's world. We avoid this miscommunication and misunderstanding that often happens. The impact of this is twofold. One, that you are less likely to have toxic arguments with your parents that anger everyone. It's not a fun time for any side or any party. But second, this is really important. You are more likely to obey their orders in the first place when you respect them more and understand your parents' decisions more. This means on our side, teenagers are more likely to follow the general guidance as well. Realize how useless Singapore's parental rules are if nobody's going to buy in and follow them on their side. The conclusion is we get far better relationships on our side that also aid a child's development. Before I move to the second argument, I'll take that POI.
If it is true that parents want to have a good relationship with their child, why is it then that they are unlikely to want to explain this in a fairly rational and reasonable way to children in our world when they don't let them do something?
Yeah, understood. This is about perception, right? Whether the child believes their parents are trying to lecture them or whether they're believing you're trying to communicate them on equal grounds. Secondly, how we better prepare teenagers for the future. The premise and weighing of this is that the role of a parent extends beyond the first 18 years of a child's life. They must prepare that teenager for the future to ensure once they leave the nest, they are able to thrive. We would rather responsibility and freedom be gradually given to them as opposed to suddenly being thrusted upon them on site Singapore. Why are children very unprepared in opposition's world? Because we say they often get a lot of responsibility thrust onto them the second they leave for college, when they're suddenly given a bank account they now have to manage, when they suddenly do not have parents looking over their shoulder in their dorm rooms. We agree that parents on both sides want their children to be prepared for the future, but it is about the method in which you undertake it. This also directly responds to their POI. In Singapore's world, a parent might do a quick lecture with their teenager on personal finance right before they leave. This may be useful, but it is hard for the teenager to manage when they've never had the experience of handling their own money before, of having this trial and error process. This is why Drew is still largely clueless over his money. Well, our second speaker, by the way. On our side, parents give the children a set amount of money during their teenage years, but the child can spend however they like. They're able to guide them when they ask for advice. It is far more likely the greater autonomy is significantly more beneficial. But we say teens in Singapore's world are less likely to know how to navigate the world beyond their childhood bubble. When they were once discouraged from dating, but now are given a lot of sexual freedom, they won't know how to go about safe sex, learn the red flags of toxic partners, or understand the impact of what their actions are. Why on our side, comparatively, are we better in preparing teenagers for the future? Because often, one, you allow them to know how to handle themselves better. When you know how to manage your finances and time, when you have different responsibilities, when there's a habit of knowing how to cook your own food for themselves and your siblings, you know how to take care of yourself in college much better. But additionally, teenagers do not need parents to constantly motivate and scrutinize them. When you are used to your parents nagging at you for studying for a test, joining a club, or finishing your work, once you get into university, you don't have any of this. You won't have developed your own habits of motivation. You are more likely to academically struggle when you rely on an external source of motivation. You are likely to have a difficult time on their side of the house when you won't on ours. Let's make a preemption quickly, because they may say teenagers are going to make bad choices on our side of the house. But we say often these choices aren't going to be atrocious. Parents on both sides will try to prevent their children from doing the worst of stuff like drugs, from constantly being blackout drunk, because this is a health risk and even a crime in many cases. All of this means teenagers are far more prepared for the future on our side of the house. Proposition is the side that cares for a child's development, while opposition actively worsens it.
Okay, I thank the speaker very much for their speech. If I can confirm that my panelists are ready, like a thumbs up nod. Sweet. In which case, I welcome the first speaker from side opposition to begin the opposition case.
Hi, can I be seen and heard? Sorry about the echo. Great, thank you. I prefer verbal POI, so please unmute and ask. If you listen to Prop 1's definition of adultification, you'll realize there's a problem. They say this is about giving them more chores or monthly allowance. Sorry, we don't need to defend treating teenagers like children. In most societies, teenagers are viewed as capable of shouldering some degree of responsibility. That's why, in the vast majority of cultures, they can go out with their friends or drive a car, for instance. They need to defend giving teenagers actually adult responsibilities and actually adult autonomy, not just the ability to have sex, but the autonomy to drink or smoke when it's legal, or to impose them the burden of having to earn their own pocket money, for instance, because that's part of being an adult. Let's be clear about two things. Our side can incrementally increase the responsibilities that teenagers bear, but this increase will happen more gradually than proposition. Additionally, parents will have fewer mechanisms to influence a child's choice in their world because they can't really use punishments or strong advice for fear that it encroaches on independence, because by virtue of the fact that you're independent, there's less guidance provided there. What is our stance? We prefer parenting models which emphasize their status and treatments as teenagers. Crucially, this debate occurs when there is a legitimate choice between these models. So if a teenager must work to ensure his family doesn't starve, then this choice wouldn't exist because they're in positions where they must shoulder adult-like responsibilities. I'm going to forward two arguments in this speech. First, about counterbalancing teenage recklessness. Second, on compromising mental health. Before that, some rebuttal. The first argument was about bettering family relationships. And they say that teenagers are rebellious, leading to hyperbolic impacts of sneaking out at night or screaming contests with their parents. Crucially, these are built on two very flimsy mechanisms. The first is that parents don't let kids fulfill their desires. Why?
Sorry, we're so sorry to interrupt, but basically there's just been a lot of drilling in our room. So could you give us maybe a second to move because we can't hear anything. The drilling is really loud. Yeah.
Volunteer can make sure they've, yeah, perfect, thank you.
Sorry, can I check what was the last thing you heard me say? Or Team Hong Kong heard me say for that matter?
Hong Kong, you're muted.
The last thing we got to was the start of the setup of Singapore. I'm sorry, we're trying to really urgently fix the issue because we think it's the floor above that's doing intentional.
Okay. Would it be better if actually I restart the speech? Because if they didn't hear much of the setup, yeah.
If that's preferable between the two teams, that's fine. But I will note that I'm going to request judges, if they're typing, to formally like delete everything quite manually, and if they're writing, to literally rip out the page and throw it out, as long as Singapore understands that, as does Hong Kong. Cool. Okay, if that's the preference.
I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. We're trying to fix the issue in 1 minute.
Don't worry. We'll give you a couple of minutes to fix it. Just let us know when you're good. Singapore. I hope that's all good.
Okay, the sound has stopped, so we should hopefully be good proceeding. Sorry.
No worries. Okay. First op speaker. You are good to go when you feel ready. Again, everyone, please do wipe that from your writing and your mind, if possible. Op speaker, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'll just restart from the start, yeah? Sorry, I can't hear.
Yeah, Hong Kong speaker, are you trying to talk? No. Okay, I think they're talking to our teammates. That's right.
Let's look at proposition's understanding of adultification. They say, and they give examples, that adultification means giving teenagers more chores or a monthly allowance. Sorry, we don't need to defend teenagers being treated as children on our side. In most societies, teenagers are viewed as capable of shouldering some degree of responsibility. That's why they can go out with their friends or drive a car in many jurisdictions. They need to defend giving teenagers actually adult responsibilities, not just sex, but the autonomy to drink or smoke when it's legal, or to impose them the burden of having to earn their own pocket money, as you do in adulthood. Let's be clear about two things. Our side can incrementally increase the responsibilities that teenagers bear, but this increase would happen much more gradually than proposition. And generally, in their world, parents have far fewer mechanisms to influence a child's choice because they cannot use punishments or strong advice for fear that it encroaches on independence, which is a key aspect they have to defend of adulthood. What is our stance? We prefer parenting models which emphasize their status and treatment as teenagers. Crucially, this debate occurs when there is a legitimate choice between these models. So if a teenager must work to ensure that his family doesn't starve, this choice wouldn't exist because they're in positions where they must shoulder adult-like responsibilities. I will forward two arguments in this speech. First on counterbalancing teenage recklessness, second on compromising mental health. Before that, some rebuttal. Their first argument was about bettering family relationships, and they say that teenagers are rebellious, leading to sneaking out at night or screaming contests with their parents. These hyperbolic impacts are built on two very flimsy mechanisms. The first mechanism is just simplistic. They say parents don't let kids fulfill their desires and therefore it creates resentment. They neglect the underlying reason that kids are rebellious because it looks unfair. That's why the most common complaint against parents that teenagers raise is, for instance, my friend's parent let them drink, whereas you are not letting me do that same thing. We eliminate the perception of unfairness because most parents don't let their kids go out or drink late at night in our world, meaning that we significantly mitigate unfairness, which is the underlying reason for this mechanism. The second mechanism, they say, is that you are more likely to communicate as a parent than to patronize your teenagers on their side. They don't explain why parents don't have incentives to explain to children the rationale behind their decisions to limit their autonomy. Because if they concede that parents have incentives to do this because they want good relationships with their children, then similarly, they will explain their decisions on our side, making their benefits exclusive. This argument is just out of the round. Their second argument was about how they prepared teenagers for adulthood. Again, the examples show that this argument is built on a misunderstanding of the debate. A big part of treating teenagers as a teenager is to introduce many of these basic life skills, like for instance, doing chores, like for instance, cooking food, or for instance, imbuing a basic knowledge about safe sex. So it's unclear why exactly parents don't have the active incentive to teach these basic skills to teenagers on our side of the house. Before I move on, I thought I heard a POI. Seeing none, first argument on counterbalancing teenage recklessness. The premise of this argument is that there are two inherent aspects of teenage psychology that make teenagers structurally overestimate their ability to be an adult. First, cognitively, their brains are wired in a way that breeds overconfidence. Neuroscientific research has found that because teenagers have an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex responsible for rational decision-making, teenagers frequently rely on the amygdala to make decisions, which is associated with emotions and impulses. Given that the brain is not consciously aware of how it in itself is wired, teenagers are inherently oblivious to their instinct of overconfidence. The second structural reason is that teenagers are uniquely susceptible to societal pressures because teenage years are a special period of identity formation. Their developing brains are trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be. This fuels an instinctive craving for acceptance and belonging, making them especially vulnerable to peer pressure and popular culture, where shows like Breaking Bad and Sex Education frequently portray teenagers engaging in vice, like, for instance, doing drugs, like, for instance, having sex. That's why the vast majority of smokers in the world pick up the habit at 17 or younger. The upshot is that teenagers are inherently likely to take on adult responsibilities they cannot handle. It looks like a 17-year-old staying out until 3 a.m. in the dangerous streets of Memphis because she thinks she is old enough for that. It looks like a teenage couple having sex because that's a cornerstone of the adult experience before the girl gets pregnant and is forced to go through the traumatic experience of an abortion. In our world, parents balance against this inherent psychological bias teenagers experience by treating them like their age. I know proposition has said that teenagers are rebellious, but this doesn't cut into the argument because parents don't just advise their teenagers about what they should do, they take active steps to prevent teenagers from rebelling by monitoring what their teenagers do, to implementing, for instance, punishments or curfews. Hence, we uniquely prevent teenagers from making risky decisions that harm themselves in the future because it's very and uniquely hard for teenagers to circumvent these measures on our side of the house. Before I move on to the second argument, happy to take that.
Given you concede that parents will be more likely to punish their teens on your side, are teenagers more or less likely to confide in their parents when they do make a mistake, such as drinking excessively?
My second argument is entirely about how you hurt the mental health of teenagers. Maybe that would respond directly to that POI. Second argument on compromising mental health. The premise is that adulthood is complex, which means that treating a teenager like an adult means exposing teenagers to the full range of complexities of adulthood, not just the joys of having independence, but also the burdens of adult experiences. When we shield teenagers from these burdens because we don't treat them as adults, parents on prop are far more likely to be frank about these struggles because they're key parts of their own adult life. It means exposing them to the pain of adultery in their parents' marriage. It means exposing them to the immense pressure of having to deal with ballooning debt and living paycheck to paycheck. This is devastating for two reasons. First, because children go through many other struggles that act as burdens to them, adapting to new academic expectations or having to adapt to a brand new social environment at school. While these struggles sound trivial to adults, the fact that children have fewer lived experiences means that they are psychologically huge challenges for them because it's the first time as a teenager you're going through such an experience. The second reason is that parents are the main support system for teenagers. Not only have children been psychologically conditioned from young to crave for support and security from their parents, these are also the closest adult figures that they spend the most time with that they can get uniquely love from. When children lose that support in proposition's world, the impact is scary. And this responds directly to the supposed benefit of more confiding in parents, because it means that 15-year-old teenagers are forced to confront the ugly impacts of cheating before their first foray into a relationship. It means teenagers come back home deflated from a long day of school, only for their mom to tell them that they should deal with these struggles themselves because their own parents are busy making an income. When children lose their only safe space, it reduces their ability to seek help, exposing them to the traumatic realities of adulthood before they're ready to handle it, flipping directly their POI. Our case is simple. Growing up should never be rushed. We are very proud to oppose.
Thank the speaker for their speech. And if I can confirm my panelists are ready. Perfect. In which case, I welcome the second speaker from side proposition to continue the debate. Here.
Okay, so assuming that everybody can hear me, I'd prefer my POIs audibly. So feel free to unmute during your selected time. None of our arguments were about teens doing chores. When preparing for college, whether you know how to manage your money, whether you know how to take care of yourself when your parents aren't home, that is what's really important. Often doing a part-time job is actually really helpful for the vast majority of families that struggle to afford college tuition for their teens. And note, OP claims that they can get gradual maturity in the future. But here's the issue. In opposition's world, teenagers don't learn these difficult tasks until they go later to college. This is when they're already far away from their parents, when they can't go to them if they mess up. In our world, when you're still under your parents' care, that's when you're better. When you do make mistakes, you have a safe place to make them and a safe place to have them corrected. I'll extend on this in my split. Also note, very quickly before my clashes, that Singapore decides to make a very contradictory framing for themselves. Because in their world, parents supposedly love their kid a lot, right? They're going to try to teach them everything, never be overly harsh to them because, obviously they love them. But at the same time, they say that they're going to force them to apparently take their own jobs or constantly lecture them about how the parents are going broke. Like, I don't see how this characterization makes sense, right? Either you love your kids so much that you're never going to tell them this sort of stuff, or you don't, and indeed all of opposition's harms indeed do materialize. So I don't think they have a very consistent framing. They need to clarify that in their O2. So then moving on to clashes. Firstly, on who improves family relationships. Because we told you this is about communication. Parents, when they see their teens as helpless children, are likely to refuse, no thank you, to explain their decisions or engage in a dialogue or debate with them. The impacts of this were very important, not just on better relationships, but also on getting orders that actually followed. Because if opposition's case is only that parents can tell their kids what to do, great. But if teens never listen to what their parents say, then what case do they have? Parents telling their kids what to do is useless if they don't follow them on the opposition side. They say, if you want a good relationship with your kids, then obviously explanations of your decisions would exist on the opposition side as well, right? Several responses. Firstly, the issue is that a parent doesn't see scolding or ordering their child around as an act that risks their relationship until the relationship is already ruined. They see it as an obligation. You think it's your strongest obligation to enforce these rules to protect your child who is in need of protection. This translates into parents refusing to budge to whatever their teenager tries to say. It's not just about having all of these incentives, it's about prioritization thereof. But note also, secondly, the bottom line is that parents on both sides do want the best for their kids, but many parents aren't always the best at communication. They may not always know the best way to illustrate a point or explain the issue for their kids. It's a lot easier to just blanket say, hey, I know best. Obviously, I know better than you. You're only 14. So I'm just going to make the decisions here. Listen to me. It's a lot harder for a parent to then go through all the process, explaining their rationalization, making sure their teen understands. It's about the difficulty in what a parent likely chooses to do. But thirdly, this isn't about voicing your own opinions. No, thank you. But about listening to your teenagers' opinions as well. You may explain your own opinion, but if you refuse to listen to your teenagers, if you don't compromise with them to some extent, that is what generates frustration in the first place. When you think you're more mature than them and that you will always know better. But fourthly, I think this is empirically just simply the truth, right? The average reasonable voter started out as a kid, judged you were a teen too. You probably experienced your parents saying, we know best, and ending the discussion there. This is just unfortunately the reality. But secondly, they claim the teens on their framing already get chores and are allowed to have sex in the status quo. Their countermodel is slowly engaging in more responsibilities. This is the core of Singapore's case. Okay, firstly, I don't think sex is very much a normal thing parents allow now, right? I don't know how lax Singapore's parents are, but they don't seem to be in the majority in the status quo. But here's the structural reason why. Because parents obviously err on the side of caution and infantilization. You are always terrified of your teen getting into a car crash when they drive, and you see them as just a kid in terms of their ability to make rational decisions. So yes, maybe you understand that a teen can make some rational decisions, but you have a constant predisposition because of the care and indeed positive incentives you have to look out for them. You will treat them like a child because that's how you see them. You're terrified of, for example, an unwanted pregnancy. But thirdly, note that their model is only a part of the issue, right? Because it's great if you allow more things, like apparently allowing them to have sex. Don't know how that's going to happen. But the issue is also the communication that we uniquely addressed that they didn't. Then they say the cause of rebellious behavior is unfairness compared to other teens. Compared to other teens. So in opposition, every teenager is prevented from drinking and partying. It resolves the issue. Firstly, let's first note that this contradicts O1's own analysis in the first argument that due to psychological changes, teenagers naturally want to drink and stay out at night, i.e. it's not a result of relative behavior, but often inherent to teens. But secondly, we give you multiple reasons as to why O1 one's claims in the first argument is more likely. Societal narratives, movies that show teens partying and drinking still exist. But even if it wasn't true, the thing about teens on op is that they don't want to follow the orders of their parents because they feel like they aren't being respected and want independence. That is to say that you still want to do whatever your parents don't want you to do. Standard negative psychology. Then they say parents can easily restrict rebellious behavior, so bad stuff doesn't happen. But look at their language here. They support parents in monitoring every action of their child, even locking them in their rooms apparently to actually enforce this. It's a gross violation of privacy, and we don't think it's ever okay. It destroys their relationship if nothing else. But realistically, there are many ways in which a teen can obviously subvert your oversight as a parent, right? Like leaving the house through your secondary story window or going out with their friends after school and pretending like you have other classes. I speak from experience. This response is crucial. It means that teenagers are more likely to do these bad things that Op talks about without any guidance or oversight. They don't properly respond to this first clash. But second clash, then, who gets better outcomes for teens, particularly for the future? I'll take the point before that, though.
If parents are inherently bad at holding rational conversations, as you say, how will they do so appropriately on your side of the house?
Okay, it's about incentives, right? It's way harder to do so, and you don't have an incentive to do so on your side when you treat your teen largely as a kid and you don't feel pressure to do so. On our side, they have some ability and you have a much stronger incentive to do so. So you're going to go through the effort and try to learn how to do so. It's pretty obvious. Secondly, on the clash of who gets better outcomes, we said it was really important. It's about college student dysfunction. When you go, not only do you not know how to manage a basic budget, but you also lack the nagging and motivation that's come from your parents to do practically anything, get good grades, join clubs. This means you literally do not have direction in your life. They say parents have fewer mechanisms to guide children because they can't use punishment or strong advice. But the point is that a guidance mechanism is entirely useless if children aren't guided by it. Maddie told you in the first argument that teenagers feel that they aren't listened to or respected by their parents, so they will refuse to follow any guidance, but instead rebel anyhow. Then they say it's symmetric, right? Because you have chores and basic knowledge of finances on the other side. This is firstly untrue in cases like sex or alcohol. But secondly, it's not just about what you allow again, right? It's about the education. It's about, do you give a 3-hour personal finance lecture like I receive and you get nothing from that? Or do you let them have hands-on experience, making their own mistakes and learning from it? I think that's a better way to teach. They say teens engage in recklessness, so this counterbalances it. But if it is true that teens are so naturally inclined during this period to go out at night and so vulnerable to peer pressure, as Owen spends a lot of time explaining, then teens aren't really going to be hindered because of curfews. Let's not pretend sneaking out and lying doesn't exist, right? Given that parents aren't spies, on either side, they're going to end up doing dangerous things. In fact, things become more appealing when parents ban them. It sparks your curiosity. Their final argument is teens feel too burdened and sad because their parents tell them you're living paycheck to paycheck. I didn't sound my response in my intro. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, this is abundantly obvious to a kid. First of all, but this also knifes their characterization on how benevolent children parents are. They don't really make sense. Third and final argument then on how we get better protection of teenagers. So why does Singapore's world decrease trust between parents and kids? Because realize that teens on both sides, if they're reckless, would likely try to become sexually active or drinking when they're not allowed to, unless they propose locking them up for hours. Furthermore, parents are likely to be far more restrictive. This is when you're punished heavily for breaking rules. When parents scold you for talking back, it means that when teenagers make a mistake on upside, they're far more likely to be afraid of punishment. They will keep a secret from their parents because they don't want to face the repercussions. Why do we get increased trust on our side? Because children are more likely to talk to their parents about pressing issues or seek guidance from them. We already explained that teens have sex or drink regardless. But let's say that you experience a problem in the process. Maybe you start to worry that you're late on your period cycle. In Ops world, you were terrified of getting your parents involved because they would kill you if they found out you had sex. In our world, when you know where your parents will treat you with more respect, you're more able to go to them to ask for pregnancy tests and get their emotional support. Because you know that even if you did make a mistake, your parents will to some degree understand that you have an autonomy about this and try to support you in a more rational adult manner, rather than blanket condemning your actions because they think you're too childish to ever engage in these actions. Opposition fails to understand the key mechanism of communication and neglects to understand the key relationship between parents, not just in terms of what they allow, but indeed in terms of where the trust is, what you can talk to them about.
Thanks, speaker, very much for their speech. And confirm my panelists ready. Perfect. In which case, I welcome the second speaker from side opposition to continue the debate.
Hi, can I check if I'm audible and visible? Right, thank you. this team just misunderstands what this motion is about. I want to first begin by rebutting this strange framing about how parents are always overprotective, and therefore there's a predisposition to protect their child. Here's the thing, that is only true in the status quo, because the narrative in the status quo is that you should protect your child, is that you should treat them like a kid. This debate is about changing these norms, changing what it means to love a child. So on your side of the house, your way of loving a child is to protect them at the teenage years. Whereas on their side of the house, they have to accept independence. I want to be clear here why this uniquely cuts into their case. Because a lot of their analysis here is just parents are overproductive and they use it to mitigate all of the worst harms. The problem is that they can't just do this because this motion is about changing the norms of love and what it means to love a child. So that's why this is out of the debate. Secondly, I want to just rebut this 40-second speaker substantive about how, it's very bad because what happens now is that children just won't tell their parents about pregnancy. First, I suspect they still will because of how massive the harms of pregnancy are. Like the fact that you are still a child and you are still a teenager and you need a form of psychological support suggests that they probably still will rely on their parents because they know that their parents deep down still love them. But secondly, I'm going to flip this in my later speech when I explain to you why under your side of the house, when you give them independence and when you tell them you should always handle it by yourself, that is when people and children are less likely to speak up to their parents because they feel like they have to deal with everything themselves on the their side of the house. Finally, I just want to take out this very strange assumption that your parents are just unreasonable and parents just don't know how to phrase things nicely. I suspect that on both sides of the house, parents have the capacity to explain their decisions to children. So on both sides, we can still tell your child that the reason why I'm stopping you from drinking is because of these harms of drinking, and therefore we think it's a bad thing. It doesn't have to be just punishing them and saying no drinking forever. So clearly, they just have a very unnuanced characterization of these parents. With that, I want to talk about what matters in this debate. First, why their side destroys the physical and psychological health of children. Secondly, on relationship, and thirdly, on preparing for the future. First, on why their side destroys the physical and psychological health of children. First, on the physical, we gave you structural reasons why children are uniquely reckless, none of which was responded to. I want to be clear here why this is devastating for their case, because this means that in the status quo, children are more likely to engage in reckless decisions. It means that on their side of the house, they are more likely to go to a nightclub, for example, and risk being sexually assaulted, for example, because they have just no protection of these things. Their only response to this is that, well, but if you are rebellious in nature, you just wouldn't follow your instructions anyway. We have three responses to this. First, because obviously we think we can cancel out the pressure to go. The reason why in the status quo there's a pressure to go to these clubs and to be rebellious is because other children are doing this as well. On our side of the house, if the dominant parenting method is to be more safe with your child, then we think that we cancel out this dominant influence. Secondly, we think that there's often pressure from young to listen to the instructions of the parents. The fact that from young, for example, you are given punishments and are told and given active disincentives to listen to your parent. The fact that they look up to them as an authority figure, for example, that is why it's structurally unlikely that they will just rebel against their parents. They don't prove the link here. But thirdly, even if you accept that they will try to rebel against their parents, we think you have the capacity to just prevent this as a parent. The only example of how they do this is to sneak out of the room. I guess the parent just locks the door of the room. Like, there are many restrictions that parents can just impose on these children. And we think that this is important because even if it means that our children don't always listen to their parents' instructions, we mitigate against the harms of the fact that they were going to go out drinking alone, for example. The fact that if you are a girl, like when you go to the area that is less protected, for example, you're likely to be sexually assaulted. We at least prevent these worst concentrated harms under our side of the house. Secondly, on psychological harms, because we give you two reasons here. First, that often children already have additional burdens in their lives, like their school, for example, like their friends, and now they're just likely to impose more burdens on them when a parent tells their child that, for instance, they're thinking of divorcing their dad, for example. But secondly, because teenagers themselves require psychological support from their parents and they actively deny this under their side of the house. Their only glib one-line response is that, well, but this is obvious to kids. This is not obvious to kids. For the vast majority of teenagers, the reason why it's not obvious is because parents on our world have an incentive to hide these things because they want to protect them as a child. On your side of the house, parents who, by their logic, treat them as an adult are therefore structurally more likely to tell this to them because it means that they are treating them as equals and as partners, for example. So that is why this harm is unique to their side of the house, and that imposes immense psychological burdens on children. I want to do weighing here. Even if you accept that very highest case about how they improve the relationship of parents and child, I believe that it is more important. And here's a simple reason. Because a relationship can be fixed in the long term when the child matures and understands why their parents said something. What cannot be fixed in the long term is the trauma of, for instance, going out at night and not having your parents stop you from doing that and just happening to be sexually assaulted. What cannot be stopped, for example, is the fact that you go out drinking one night and you realize that you made terrible mistakes. This is something that is irreversible and we protect under our side of the house. Second, relationships. I'm going to win on their metric here and demonstrate why they don't actually improve parental relationships. Here's where I want to be very clear. I want to examine the psychological reason behind a child's resentment, which is the key mechanism of their case on relationships. Resentment does not exclusively arise from the specific parental action of not letting them drink. It stems from the fundamental human emotion that is particularly acute in children. This emotion of unfairness, that their life is not perfect and could be changed. This is the structural reason why everyone and every child, even adults, for example, always view the grass as greener on the other side. This is important because often we contrast our current life experiences with other possible versions which could give us more utility as social creatures. Why is this analysis very important? Because in their will, teenagers will still feel resentful because they will still feel a sense of unfairness, except that it's now directed to another parental action. The action of, for instance, not giving them sufficient pocket money, telling them that you should be more independent to earn your own money. It will be directed towards having to bear the burden of the parent telling them what to do as an adult. So the point here is that because we always have discomfort in our lives and we always look to the other side, this issue of resentment and feeling unfair is a symmetric one that is not relevant. What is more important is that on our side of the house, we protect the fundamental human relationship of trust, because we think that on our side of the house, we get children to know that their parents truly love them. Before I move on, I'll take the POI.
Your first speaker said that you support parents locking their children up so they can't go out and drink. Then you say that parents aren't overprotected. Which one of you is wrong and why?
No. First, I explain why the overprotective part is dependent on the motion and the narrative, and this changes that. Secondly, we explain how there's a spectrum of impacts here. So obviously, in the most egregious ones, where your child could literally go out drinking or do things that are potentially illegal, then yes, we will lock them up. In more mild instances, we're willing to do less severe things. So that's just irrelevant to that case. So with that, even on their own measure of relationships, what we prove is that resentment and some dissatisfaction in the short term will exist. What is different on our side of the house is that we get the protection that we truly want. Finally, on my substantive. This substantive will further clash with our case on preparing for the future and show you why we do it better. Here's the reason why. First, because on their side of the house, their mechanism of telling their child what to do in the future as an adult is non-unique, because we can also provide information on our side of the house and give you controlled experiences. For example, instead of letting you go out to drink alone, you can just go with your child to drink and therefore teach them what is the appropriate level of alcohol tolerance, for example, to be mindful of. So that's why we can get that under our side of the house. But secondly, their comparative is one where they just are unlikely to even listen to the guidance of their parents. And the reason for this is because on their side of the house, structurally, they create a culture of independence where a parent's word is discounted. That means that on their side of the house, people aren't going to listen to their parents' tips of how to learn or how to save their money or how to drink alcohol properly, for example. But thirdly, why is our comparative better? Because on our side of the house, we can directly give you advice and enforce such advice. We think this is important for two reasons. First, because there's a culture of recognizing the parent's word, and therefore you're more likely to buy into this. And secondly, even if you don't listen to your parent's word, you at least instill these habits on a subconscious level. So for example, when your parent tells you that you can only drink at home, and every time you drink, you have to only drink this specific amount, for example. Or for example, when you give them money, you dictate as a parent what they should be spending money on and what they should be prioritizing. These are small mental habits and customs that develop over time where you have a parent that's actively enforcing it. We think this is important because often when it comes to approaching adulthood, forming mental schema is incredibly important. And the only way we get that on outside the house is when we change this and when we enforce this through a subconscious level in the long term. So that's why even on their own metric of preparing for the future, we win. At the end of the day, they have not responded to the most acute harm that they do to children under their side of the house. By the time they do so the next week, it's probably going to be too late. For all these reasons, I've never been prouder to oppose.
I thank the speaker very much for their speech. And if I can confirm that the panelists are ready. Perfect. In which case, I welcome the third speaker from side proposition to conclude the substantive case for the prop.
Can I check that my audio and video are fine? Okay, in that case, I take POIs through the chat and I'll open up the chat now. For all the time Singapore tells us that teens are rebellious, they lack the explanation as to why teens will be receptive when parents patronize them. Singapore cannot simultaneously claim that parents are loving in their world, but hateful in ours. It was unrealistic. 3 questions then. Firstly, on family relationships. Secondly, on which side prepares teens better. And lastly, which side better protects teenagers. Firstly, I want to do 2 points of characterization. The first point, what does our world look like? Parents are still parents in our world. They're not going to be heartless monsters who tell their children that they should bear every single burden in the world. We told you from first that parents have an inclination to be overbearing on on their children for a couple of reasons. But this wasn't just a narrative norm. This was your biological instinct. This was the fact that these feelings are developed in the process of seeing your child grow up, regardless of the culture around you. Because parents feel insanely attached to their children. You have a natural urge to protect them biologically. You can't bear seeing your child grow up. When you remember them taking their first steps, you still want to coddle them and protect them from the dangers of the world. Intuitively, this is why parents have their heart break when they see their teenager leave for university. It's because they still see their teenager as their little child whom they raised and whom they fed. What this means is that for a family that is financially struggling, you probably don't throw every single debt bill pressure onto your child and make them see the horrors of the world. The more likely characterization is that you tell your child they should probably start saving money now instead of spending it, that your teenager should probably pick up a part-time job and save up for their college fund. Additionally, on our side, you can still generally guide your teenager. Parents are not suddenly going to be neglectful, but they will interfere less. So if your child is underage drinking, obviously you're going to step in because that is illegal. You'll punish them because it's a clear violation. But if they are of age, it means you likely ask them to drink at home instead, and you probably ensure that they're not blackout drunk, moderating their amounts, instead of bar them from doing so entirely or be extremely harsh about it. What does this then mean for the debate? It means that parents probably aren't going to tell their child that they're unfaithful and adulterous monsters who are cheating. They probably want to tell their spouse directly rather than through their children. Singapore's case was unrealistic. The second point of characterization, what does Singapore's world look like? Singapore claims that parents treat teens as teenagers and not children, so they will still teach children safe sex and assign chores anyway. If we're able to show you why parents, in thinking their teens have this special status, will likely impose more restrictions that worsen parent-child relationships, we win. Because O2 suddenly claims that the narrative they support is not one of protecting their children, and he tries to dodge the overprotective behavior of parents in the status quo. Let's be clear, treating your teenager as a minor means protecting them, but we gave you analysis that parents have seen you since you were a child. It's hard for them to see you as an adult naturally, and they're very used to protecting you because that's what they have always done for the first 15 years of your life. This isn't about being the most overprotective. This is about a general characterization. But even if some teenagers are allowed to do that, the majority of them are not. But regardless, our case wasn't only about what you choose to allow and disallow, but the method in which you do so. This is crucial. This is about how children receive this information. It's about perception. Are you listening to another session of nagging, even when parents are trying to rationalize this discussion, or are you actually having a communicative dialogue? No response to any of this framing from first. Singapore should not have just tried to frame us out of the debate. We wanted to hear direct responses. Quickly on their split, they say that you're more likely to follow advice for the future if you're used to following your parents' orders, and that if you solely introduce your teen to alcohol, they're better prepared for the future. Note that this was actually our side. We're the ones that allow teens to try alcohol at home because you don't see your teen as a legal minor like the motion implies. More importantly, you can't really have advice for these topics if you're emphasizing that they're children, or if you infantilize your teen, which is a more likely characterization. Are you really going to frankly show them how to use a condom? Likely not. You can't really talk to them about being an adult if you see them more as a teen. Firstly, then on family relationships, we told you that teenagers naturally yearn for freedom. In Singapore's world, when teenagers are constantly denied this because they're still seen as teenagers, this is when frustration begins to boil. When you see your parents as stripping away your golden teen years, the resentment often sours relationships for years down the line. Our comparative is that parents are more likely to talk and explain their beliefs to a teenager rather than patronize or scold them. It also means that teenagers are less likely to rebel. They're more likely to listen to their parents when their parents explain that they should not go to a party because the risk is too high. They gave us two responses. Their first response was that parents want a good relationship with their teenagers, so they communicate regardless. Firstly, parents have incentives, but they also have counter incentives. For the majority of parents, it is so much easier for them to tell their teenager to just listen to them because they're older, because they have the authority and they're able to tell their teen to stop talking back. But secondly, the perceptions of parents and children are different. The parent probably doesn't think what they're doing is a big deal, but it may be immensely impactful for the child. What this means is that a parent doesn't think too much about banning a teen from a party, but a teen remembers how much they were left out, how angry and frustrated they were when they were losing out on a teenage experience. Parents are not used to not explaining themselves to you for the first 15 years of your life. This is just how they see things are. Their second push was that relationships only sour due to comparisons and unfairness, but none of this occurs under their side. The reason why, firstly, you want something isn't merely because your friend is allowed to, but you see glamorized parties in the media. Often teens feel more adventurous. They want to be the cool friend of the bunch. But secondly, even if parents tend to be strict, the media still portrays teenagers partying, even more so particularly because it's interesting when most teens have lived a life where you tended to be discouraged from going out very often. Drew've told you this, no response. Thirdly, given that opposition agrees teenagers naturally want to drink and have sex, all teenagers on opposition will be mad and frustrated at parents who lock them up. Therefore, at school or through text, teenagers will do something called complaining to one another. This is worse because teenagers often inflame anger in each other and make plans to sneak out collectively together. Fourthly, let's be clear, this debate isn't about mandating that all parents adopt either one model or the other. Rather, we prefer one model on value. But here's the thing, we agree realistically, not all parents will follow the model we want. Some parents will still be overprotective on our side. Some parents will will still prioritize autonomy on opposition. But it is in opposition's world where you get this jealousy, because as long as you have one friend who is given autonomy, the children in opposition's world will be jealous. They will want to rebel. Opposition's argument is one for our side. The way at the end of this clash is that family relationships are key, because when children hold grudges against their parents, it manifests in emotional baggage you carry on throughout your adulthood. By the way, relationships often can't just be fixed in the long term when you still remember all the hatred you felt towards them. When fixing relationships takes a really long time and you have a lot of unhealed hurt and anger. Secondly, on the protection of teenagers. Before that, I'll take a POI.
If parents are fundamentally treating their children as kids on both sides, then your advice and treating them like adults also wouldn't work. This cuts both ways. Therefore, we change the norm. We tell parents that when you love your child, you should protect that child.
No, obviously, it's a counterbalancing force. Just because you care about a child doesn't mean you cannot change how you treat them. Secondly, then, on which side better protects teenagers? We told you that in Singapore's world, teenagers are treated harshly when they make mistakes, when they know their parents see them as a child or as a teen and will be angry at their immaturity. On our comparative, we'd rather teenagers make mistakes under a safer environment when they're more willing to seek guidance, when they're not afraid that their idea of contraception is inaccurate. Their response was that teenagers will be scarred by going out late at night. Let's repeat this one more time. Parents aren't the FBI. If you lock them in their room, teenagers can still sneak out the window because they want to go to a party, and Singapore agrees that they have this natural inclination. It's impossible for them to claim that they can prevent teenagers from doing these dangerous experiences. The difference then becomes, are teens willing to tell their mom that their boyfriend seems to be abusive or that their period is too late? Are they willing to seek help? That's how we help them. But in their best case, teenagers on their side will do so the second they leave their parents' roof, when they go off to college, for instance, because they think that they have been forced to not do it for years and really want to do it. Maddie told you this is so much worse. We'd rather teenagers experience making mistakes in a safe environment where parents are close to protect them as the worst impacts occur. The weighing of this is that it's really unrealistic that Singapore gets a world where no teen rebels. Instead, we protect those who do make mistakes. Lastly, then, on which side prepares teenagers better? We told you that in Singapore's world, freedom is suddenly thrust in the hands of teenagers once they leave for university. They now have sexual freedom, money that they do not know how to manage. On the comparative, teenagers under our world better know how to handle themselves. When you know the value of money and how to best spend it, it means you have a strong work ethic and the ability to juggle different responsibilities. Their response was that teenagers tend to be rebellious. Often, it's not that teens want to pick fights for no reason, but when they feel restricted, when they believe their parents do not credit their opinions to the same extent they would credit independent adults, that is when that rebellion starts. This is when you believe your parents do not understand you and that you're more grown up. This is when you're more likely to rebel. Their second response here was that they take adult responsibilities they cannot handle, such as unwanted pregnancies and their burdens. If your family is poor, once again, that's very visible. But realistically, it may be beneficial to learn about debt. Our worst case, when your parents explain to you the mistakes they made that led them to fall into debt, you can avoid that in the future. Regardless, you as a parent still want to avoid the worst harms, so it's not like you'll force these children to pay for their pregnancy bills. This was very extreme. At the end of the day, teenagers need to know how to navigate the world, what safe sex looks like. It's not enough to prepare them for the first 18 years of their life when you're there prepared for the other 60.
I thank the speaker for their speech. And if I can confirm my panelists are ready. Sweet. In which case, I welcome the third speaker from side opposition to conclude the substantive section of the debate.
Hi, am I audible on this one? Thank you. Now, before I go any further, I want to make a few strategic observations. The first is that a vast majority of their mitigation to our case is parents are inherently overprotective. So because they are inherently overprotective, all the worst harms you talk about will never accrue. This is just one line of mitigation they have. I want to take this out the top. First, this cuts both ways. If it is true that parents are inherently overprotective, how will parents be able to have adult real conversations in their world with their children, where they are fairly neutral, but they try not to encroach on their independence too much? I want to point out they say parents will learn, without actually telling us how they will learn or why they would, especially because they contradict this later when they say, actually, parents just want to stop their children from going out. It's very easy for them to just ban them from going out altogether. So I want to point out this is a huge concession and a huge contradiction. This cuts both ways. What then are the relevant differences? if it is true that parents can advise children and explain to these children, this is why you shouldn't go out to party, we suspect that's why under our side of the house, they can also justify their decisions to children about why they're not letting them go. So we think obviously this cuts both ways as well. The last thing I want to clear about is the final difference between both sides. The difference is that we prevent the worst risks that often come from this kind of excessive behavior under our world. So we think we can stop 100% of, or at least not 100%, but a fairly large proportion of teenagers from succumbing to these things. With that in mind, I'm going to ask 3 questions. First, how do teenagers respond under either side? Second, emotions about teenagers. And third, on teaching them important things. I want to note they spend very little time on the last contention, which was already their first argument after we responded and flipped it. First, how do teenagers respond under either side of the house? Before I go any further, I want to observe how much their case has shrunk. By the time we got to third proposition, they said, our world looks like letting children drink at home, not letting them go out to party. I want to be clear, that's what our side looks like. Because it's on our side that we take away the independence, we minimize the independence. This doesn't mean completely banning them from drinking altogether, because by the time you're 16 or 18 in different jurisdictions, you have the right to drink. But what we would do is place restrictions on where you can do it and slowly and more gradually lift those restrictions. So I just want to observe their case has massively shrunk from first speaker. What was the main thing they tried to say? Their logic went like this. Teenagers want to do activities like drinking. When parents want teenagers not to do them, they will just do them anyway. First response. Before I go any further, what comparative must they accept? Teens are significantly more reckless in their world because of the 2 structural reasons we gave you from the start of this debate about why teenagers are inherently predisposed towards making reckless decisions. I want to note, both of these did not get any direct response. So they concede that under their side of the house, teenagers are going to make terrible, reckless decisions. So this is a huge harm. The best case response they can give is, teenagers listen to parents' advice. First, I've already pointed out why this is irrelevant. But second, I pointed out in my second speaker why we do this better. His substantive explains why, structurally, teenagers are going to be very unlikely under their side of the house to listen to parents' advice because there are many other factors that are significantly more overpowering. If, for example, your parent advised you on don't get too drunk, but you're now at the party where the lights are blaring and everyone else is drinking a lot, that is when you would face significant pressure to just disregard this advice and drink more. We flipped this when we said teenagers are more willing to listen to parents' advice and make less reckless decisions in the long term under our side of the house. Because what we can do is we can enforce specific habits that influences the way they act in the future. If from a young age we tell you, don't drink so much, and we actually take you to a bar, for example, and we don't buy you that much alcohol, and we give you very little, and slowly we increase the amount and cap it off somewhere. This instills the habit and the mental schema of drinking less in you. So I want to point out, this means they have no response to our analysis for why their comparative is terrible. So they concede in their world, more children get drunk and do horrible things. They concede in their world, in the most excessive instances, more teenagers might even end up getting sexually assaulted because they're drunk at a club. I want to point out the second response I have to this then. Parents have an ability to restrict teenagers from doing this under our side of the house. We give you a spectrum of tools to respond to their assertions. We pointed out in the more mild end, it can look like punishments, like taking away certain rights to disincentivize you from doing it. In more extreme cases, it can look like literal physical confinement. They say you can sneak out of your window. That's the only response you get in third. We'll lock the window, okay? So I think it's very strange for them to assert that. Why is this important? The weighing here is simple. Even if there's more resentment under our side of the house, we're willing to trade that off because on our side, we at least don't let children act on their reckless impulses that have huge harms compared to their side of the house where they concede because they didn't respond to the 2 reasons we gave you that children will do these more reckless things. Why does this trade off resentment? This is because of what my second speaker told you when he explained even if there's more resentment, that's okay because resentment can change in the long term as you grow older and you understand your parents' decisions. When you yourself become a parent and you understand why they did that specific thing. However, these harms that occur are often irreversible and cannot be changed. So even if you lose on resentment, we are happy to take that. Before I go further, I'll take the POI.
Parents being protective is not a force that is overwhelming. It addresses the extremes, but there's still leeway. Do you believe parents can have the intent to protect their child, but believe there's a more effective method of doing so by giving them more autonomy?
So functionally, what you are saying is this. You are saying, we're going to stop your child from getting completely blackout drunk. If you let the child go to the party and you tell your child, you can come back very late. We're not going to rigorously enforce this. You can come back when you can. Maybe in principle, you would advise him not to get blackout drunk, but unless you are physically there at the party or you don't let them go to the party, there's no way you can stop them from getting blackout drunk and all the horrible consequences we told you would happen. So I think that POI just loses you the debate. Second, I want to flip resentment. Before I go any further, note that third proposition did not respond to what my second speaker explained, why resentment was symmetrical. He gave you analysis for why, on their side of the house, children will find many things to be resentful with parents about as well. He explains to you, for example, children will ask, why are you making me work instead of giving me more pocket money directly? Why are you making me sacrifice my summer vacation doing this instead? I wish you would love me more. So we point out, even if there's resentment in our world, what we have explained is that teenagers are structurally likely to be resentful under both sides of the house. So this cuts both ways. So this means you cannot buy any of their benefits on resentment because it hurts their side as well. So the last thing I'm going to do then is move on to my second contention on the emotional trauma of teenagers. And again, I want to point out here, they had no direct response to our argument about how this is intensely traumatizing for many teenagers. We told you when a parent treats you like an adult, it doesn't just mean nice things. It doesn't just mean letting you go out and come back whenever you want. It doesn't just mean letting you have complete free use of the car. Often, what it means is them having sobering conversations with you. Often it means them telling you, maybe your father and I are going to end up getting a divorce. Often it ends up exposing these ugly details. Again, the only response we get is parents are inherently overprotective. I'm going to give you one more response that eliminates this response in the case of this clash. As my second speaker tells you, the only reason parents are inherently overprotective is because they think being overprotective is the best way to show their love. The difference is that this changes on their side of the house because the narrative of what it means to be a loving parent is not to be overprotective. In their world, being a loving parent means treating your child more like an adult. It means giving them more independence. At the point where the narrative of what it means to love a child changes so drastically under their side of the house, that is why parents are structurally likely in their world to expose more of these details. That's why parents are structurally likely to offload more of the emotional burdens to children. Even if they want to talk about poor children, do you know what is even worse for a poor child? When you tell the poor child and you make him live with anxiety that your father has $100,000 in debt. Even in our counterfactual, if you vaguely know that you are poor, we think often giving them the specific details and putting this pressure on them is psychologically crushing. We think being a teenager in their world is testament to just destroying your mental health because of the amount of stress and the amount of pressure you face when your parents are brutally honest with you. We had no response to any of this argumentation about how this is just terrible for teenagers and emotionally traumatizing. It is too late in prop reply. Last, on teaching important things to children. And they really wanted to make this about teaching children about how to spend their money. And I want to note that they completely dropped this by third proposition, because they realized that this wasn't really an impact they could win on either because of how we flipped it in second speaker. We pointed out it's far more likely that your children actually internalize the important things you tell them when you force them to act a specific way. When you force them to act a specific way and they build habits and build mental schema that they carry on forever. So we think children are far more likely to manage their money better in our side of the house, when we force them, for example, to save their money more. And we say every week you must save X amount of your money. So what have I demonstrated at the end of this speech? First, their only harm is about rebelliousness. And the only way they impact that is children will do very bad things anyway. What I've done is explained why first, we stop those bad things from happening. So even if children are rebellious in nature, we have the ability to constrict them. Secondly, they have conceded that in their counterfactual, children do very reckless things. So the way off is clear. Even if in our world, there's more resentment, which I've already explained cuts both ways, the difference is that on our side, we temper the most reckless instincts of children and we stop them from doing the worst things. Additionally, all our harms of worse emotional trauma stack on top of this to win us the round. For these reasons, I'm very proud to stand with the opposition.
Thank the speaker very much for their speech. And if I can confirm, my panel's ready. Maurice, Mattia?
Yeah, I'm good, sorry.
Cool, perfect. In which case, in traditional debating fashion, I reverse the order and welcome back the reply speaker from side proposition bench. Here.
Hi, can I be seen and heard? Let's look at the two worlds in this debate. From the get-go, Prop's world was built on a misunderstanding of adulthood. They said it was about having a monthly allowance or inculcating skills like cooking or how to do chores. We pointed out from first, look at the motion. It says on our side, we treat teenagers as teenagers, not treat teenagers as children. So we still teach them how to cook or financial literacy by giving them an allowance. And we still allow them to go out to spend time with their friends. Their side was constantly evading the burden to defend truly adult responsibilities, to let teenagers drink, smoke, have sex, or to force them to earn their own allowance. When Proposition realized much of their case was irrelevant, their case devolved into a list of unproven assertions about human psychology. They said parents were inherently overprotective and overbearing on their children, compromising relationships in our world. Not only does this claim have zero justification, but they don't realize it cuts both ways. How is the same parent going to hold a rational, reasonable adult conversation with their teenager about drinking and sex in their world? Zero response to the questions we asked down the bench. Their lackluster POI response was about how parents have the incentive to learn how to do this in their world. How? Why? Is it even powerful enough to overcome the instinctive, inherent tendencies of parenthood? They say, ultimately, it was unclear how this mechanism worked. We were clear down the bench. This is symmetric. If parents can explain why a teen shouldn't go to drink in their world, they can also explain why they aren't letting that teen drink in ours. The difference was that we prevent for certain the risks of drinking, smoking, and sex that this teenager isn't prepared to take on. They asserted it is abundantly clear to teenagers the emotional burdens of adulthood, which shows they weren't listening to the nuance of our case and examples. It is not clear what the emotional trauma of your dad's adultery is if your mom doesn't tell it to you. It is not clear what the stress of actually providing for your financially struggling family is if you never held a job of their own or that burden in the first place. Finally, when they realized much of their case had been taken out, their world retreated and shrank to two flimsy claims. By third prop, they already conceded to the fact that teens will act recklessly in their world because they did not respond to the two reasons we gave you for why this is true. Their first claim that they hung their hat on was that teens can still sneak out. Not only does this fail to understand that parents wield genuine control over the actions of their teenagers through, the threat of punishment or by sitting in the living room next to the main door so it's hard for you to sneak out, this also fails to understand a simple fact about the world. If you let rather than try to stop someone to do something, that thing tends to happen more. The second claim, I quote third prop, is that the difference in this debate is their second speaker argument about whether teens tell their parents about mistakes. This ignored Eunhao's response that teens who desperately need parental support to overcome this huge, scary prospect of, for instance, teenage pregnancy, will still turn to their parents for help because they view it as acceptable to rely on parents as sources of support. Their world is hopelessly lost, and no amount of late shifting and prop reply will save that case. In contrast, our world was one that protected the physical and psychological security of children. We gave structural reasons for why teenagers often engage in reckless behavior, because they're cognitively overconfident and they're susceptible to cultural pressures. This meant that on either side, they'd engage in such behavior. The difference is that we prevent the worst harms when a teenager goes to a party and leaves blackout drunk, or when they visit unsafe clubs and is unfortunately sexually assaulted in a dangerous city. Our world was one that protected the mental health of psychologically vulnerable teenagers, because instead of treating them as equal adults and imposing concerns of finance and divorce and emotional struggles on them, parents continue seeking to protect them from this harm. Our case was simple. Growing up should never be rushed. We are very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker very much for their speech, and if I can confirm my panel for the last time, they're good to go. Awesome, in which case I welcome back the prop reply to conclude off the prop bench, this debate as a whole, and indeed the semi-final for WSDC 2022. Here.
Okay, so assuming that everybody can hear me, I will start my reply shortly. At third, Singapore's case has evolved to be, because it's really likely that teens get blackout drunk, parents would just be forced to ban their teens from going to social scenes as a whole and force children to act in certain ways, as O3 says verbatim. What this means is that all of the harms we told you about worsened relationships, increased rebellion, and likelihood of parents being authoritative do manifest. What is left in their case is just, at least children won't have sex and get drunk, and mom won't tell their kid about having a bad marriage with dad. Quick clarification before my clashes, because Singapore keeps trying to strawman us. In the status quo, parents are naturally predisposed towards the opposition model, not because of societal narratives, but because biologically you see your teen as a child that you raised. It was ridiculous to claim that because societal narratives change, parents will now refrain from protecting your child, because this is not how you should express love. We prefer our model, which is a counterbalance to this natural incentive. A parent being overprotective doesn't mean that they never change. Parents in our world is when you are more likely to try and listen to your teen's opinions, when you let them date and drink, but on neither side will you do nothing to discourage criminal acts like doing cocaine. It's not a contradiction, it's nuance. Learn the difference, Singapore. But regardless, our case wasn't only about what you choose to allow and disallow, but the method of doing so, how children receive the message. No response to any of this critical framing we gave you in every single speech. First clash then, on who gets better outcomes for teenagers. Here's why we win this clash on bad outcomes. We told you three key things, sorry. Firstly, parents are very unlikely to stop teenagers from doing bad things. Chloe and Maddie told you that teens can easily subvert oversight. You can't punish a teen who isn't caught. So the incentives that Singapore talks about are the same on both sides. You still have peer pressure. You are jealous of the one teen who has freedom. This predisposition to reckless behavior is symmetric because you always compare yourself to the one kid that doesn't have super protective parents. On either side, teens are going to drink and have sex. Singapore can't assert a locked door and punishments are sufficient unless they're going full-scale FBI and locking kids into their rooms in an authoritarian way. Chloe gave you three key max that broke the deadlock further. Firstly, the teens are more likely to be open to their parents' opinions and advice if they believe they're respected. When you have good communication, you won't just ignore your parents as overbearing. Secondly, teens don't see heavy drinking and drugs as an act of rebellion. When a parent bans a teen from doing something, that's when you ignite curiosity. When doing drugs is a cathartic act of rebellion for teens. That's when it's more appealing on the flip. Thirdly, though, we protect teens who make mistakes. When your teen does have unsafe sex, they're less afraid of telling you that your period is late. That's when parents know about the bad things they've done and can help. Opposite side, where teenagers sleep over at a guy's house when they're drunk, so they avoid punishment because their parents would kill them. Their only claim left standing on this clash is that parents create habits that teens will follow, including for the future. But the point is that you can't have these conversations about the future. You can't show your teens tools for safe sex if you think they'll use them when they're young in a way that you would kill them for. You're more likely to talk about it on our side when you see them as adults and indeed want to prepare them for the future more. I think we comprehensively win on this clash, which is their only way to win. Second clash, though, on the parent-child relationship. Let's concede that locked doors and stalking works to stop children from going out. We give you a simple claim. This sounds suffocating and unbearable for the teen who's rapidly changing. Parents and teens will argue, constant frustration. This is a way to permanently ruin parent-child relationships. Note the importance. For the next 50 years, children rely on parents throughout their adult life. Singapore deprives children of this because you ruin the most critical relationship. The response is that kids only want to be reckless because their friends are reckless. If they change everyone's parenting, problem solved. Note that this nice 3 minutes of O1 talking about the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, which by the way is indeed unsubstantiated psychology. Either you are reckless because of your brain chemistry or because of peer pressure. They can't have it both ways. More importantly, note how this is still a norm. As long as there are some parents who aren't super overprotective, then you're also going to compare yourself to those kids and want to do more. Then they say, if parents don't have an ability to clearly explain their reasoning on either side, then it's symmetric. But obviously parents have a base ability and can learn more. The difference is incentive. If you don't feel that your teens can engage in dialogue with you, then you won't bother. More importantly, I told you about the prioritization. You don't risk a dialogue because you want to ensure that they don't go out on all costs. Both sides aren't perfect, but effort is the difference on our side in meaningful connection. Their final claim is that you feel resentful when your parents give you more responsibilities. When a parent explains that they will let you hang out with your friends, as long as you do chores or then or to spend money, you have to make it. That seems reasonable to any individual, even a teen, because resentment is occurring when you feel unheard, when you don't feel like your parents are willing to engage in a dialogue with you. In every single metric, on improving relationships with children, indeed on bettering their actions and preparing them for the future, opposition is the side that refuses to have parents indeed having any role in their children's lives, present or future.
I thank the speaker for their speech and indeed all speakers for an excellent debate. Please virtually across the floor, shake hands, and we will make our way